All right, so we're ready to get going here with some code, get our hands dirty with some code. Before we do, though, just a little bit of setup. What I've done is I've downloaded my project files and I've extracted them onto my desktop just for easy reference here. I'm trying to keep things nice and simple here for you. So make sure you have your project files folder handy. Inside the project files folder, you will find start.html. I'd like you to do two things with this guy. Number one, open them up inside your coding application of choice. Again, I'm using Coda here. You could use Dreamweaver or Brackets or even a plain text editor or whatever coding application you want. Okay, that's the first thing I want you to do with this guy. And by the way, when you get this guy opened up inside your coding application, as you can see, he's pretty plain here. Not a whole lot of action happening here. There's no real content actually inside this file, just some structural HTML for our HTML document. So this is the first thing I want you to do with this guy. The second thing that I want you to do with this guy is open him up inside your browser of choice. I'm using Chrome once again, of course, and we get nothing inside the browser because, let me head on back here, there's nothing going on inside my coding application, inside the start.html file. Now, inside start.html, again, I've given us just basic structure to start things off because I want to show you exactly how to build and structure your Flexbox-based layouts from complete scratch, okay? The other thing I want to mention is all of the CSS that we write is going to be inside an internal style sheet. I don't want to mess around with external style sheets and, linking files and all this kind of crazy stuff, multiple documents and things like that. I want to keep this focused on Flexbox and keep it as straightforward for you as possible. Of course, in the real world, you would be using external style sheets. Okay? So, to begin using Flexbox, the first thing that you and I need to do is we need to define a parent element within our layout as a Flex container. Now, doing this allows us to specify exactly which elements in our layout we want to control with Flexbox. So perhaps there's part of our layout that we want to control with Flexbox, and there's other areas of our layout that we don't want to control with Flexbox. We certainly have that option. Now, defining or specifying a parent element as a Flex container not only sets us up to use Flexbox, but it simultaneously sets up any child elements that the parent contains as Flex items. I hope that makes sense. Let me say that one more time. So we have a parent element. We define it as a Flex container. Any child elements that that Flex container or that parent container contains or holds instantly becomes Flex items. Certainly cool. Definitely cool stuff. So let's jump into it here. Again, we're going to build everything from complete scratch. So inside start.html, let's build some structure, some simple structure for our look at Flexbox here. And I'm going to do this using divs. Okay, so I'm going to go and start creating my first div here. This is inside the body element, of course. I'm going to go div. Right off the bat, I'm going to specify an ID selector, which you and I are going to go and create in just a moment. I'm going to call this guy parent. Okay, and then let's go and close this guy off, something like this. Let me zoom in on my code a little bit so you can see exactly what I'm doing here. So just something very, very basic like this, just a simple div, okay? And let me break that closing tag down onto another line below there because we want to go and establish some child elements here as well. And again, I'm going to be using divs for the whole shebang here. So open angle bracket div once again. This time I'm going to set up a class, or I want to specify a class rule on these guys. And what I'm going to do here, just kind of follow along the magical mystery tour here for a moment, and then I'll explain everything here. I'm going to go class equals, and then in quotes, I'm going to go child with a space, and then I'm going to say child1, just like that, okay? Now, what I'm doing here is I'm specifying, of course, two class rules that are being applied to this div, okay? And let's go and close off our div here so we don't forget. Okay, so all of our child elements are going to be under the control of two class rules, child and then child1, or perhaps child2, child3, child4, depends on how many we wind up with here. Okay, so give me a moment here. I'm just going to do a little bit of copying and pasting, and through the magic of copying and pasting, boom, we have a basic layout, something like this. I'm just going to change my class rules here to child 2 and 2. If I can get my cursor to play nice. Child 3. There we go. So that's the basic structure that you and I are going to start off with. Again, very, very simple. And again, the focus here is Flexbox, not building awesome layouts. We'll get to that later on. Okay? All right, so that's what we have. The only other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to throw in a little bit of content into each of these divs. I'm going to just type in 1, 2, and 3, or you can go and paste in maybe some lorem ipsum if you want, or you could type out the numeric words, O-N-E, 1, 2, T-W-O, whatever you want, right? Or you could just leave them as is, as I've done them here, okay? All right, so with that out of the way, let's go and set up our CSS. So this is all internal again, of course, but in the real world, we'd, of course, set up an external style sheet or add this stuff to our external style sheet. So I'm going to go and set up the ID selector first. As you can see, I've already started here. So it's going to be parent, of course. This is the parent container, or I should say the ID selector for the parent container. And again, I'm keeping things unbelievably simple and basic here to start us off. I'm throwing on a background of steel blue. That's it. That's all I'm doing here. Okay. So that's our ID selector. And then I'm going to go and set up the class rule for child, which as we know is applied to all 3 child elements. All I'm going to do with this fella for the time being is I'm going to say width 100 pixels. That's it. Okay. So that's him out of the way. And then we have our 3 child class rules for each of the 3 child elements. So let's go and set them up. I'm going to go child 1, and then in brackets here, all I'm going to do, and you might be sitting there going, man, this is so basic. It's so simple. Again, the focus here is exactly on how Flexbox works. I'm going to set a background color of sky blue, just like this. And hang in there because the cool stuff is coming here. All right, now, again, magic of copying and pasting. We're going to go and set up our 3 class rules like so. I'm going to go and change the blue that I'm using, though. Sky blue for child 1. I'm going to use powder blue for child 2. Harking back to the 70s, of course, leisure suits. And child 3, we're going to do cadet blue, just like this. Okay? Now, if we save our work here and head back to the browser, and refresh, Control-Command-R, we wind up with something like this. Now, perhaps this was what you were expecting, and I hope it was. What we wind up with is a traditional web layout that you and I are hopefully very familiar with and very comfortable with. The child divs are all block-level elements, and therefore, each child element breaks onto a new line. We've talked about this a few times already in this course, right? Now, the height of parent, as you can see here, is being determined by the block level elements that it contains, and it spans right across the entire browser window, or the entire available space, if you will, because there's no width set on the parent either. Okay, so it defaults to 100% of the browser window or the available space, right? Now, let's go and establish this parent container as the Flex container. I think you'll be surprised at how simple this is. It's really straightforward here. Back inside my coding application, I'm going to go and find my parent ID selector, and after his last property there, the background property there, I'm simply going to say display and then :space flex. That's it, followed by a semicolon. That's it. That's all we need to do. Check this out. I'm going to save my work. I'm going to head back to the browser. I'm going to refresh Control-Command-R and check this out. The parent, of course, still spans across the entire browser window, which is perfectly fine. But check out the child elements. They're now sitting inline. They're not breaking onto their own separate lines. This is because all of our child divs are now being defined as Flex items, right? And the height, by the way, of the parent container has now collapsed because we have no additional height set on these guys. In other words, the height of all these guys is being determined by the content, right? So the parent container is now a Flex container, and the child elements are now Flex items. If you wanted to, and this is completely optional, you could head back to your code and you could throw a height onto your parent if you wanted to, or perhaps even onto the child class that we've gone and created there. Perhaps something like this. I'm going to go height, full colon space. Maybe I'll go 100 pixels once again, something like this, and then refresh. There we go. Something like that. Okay. So I hope this is starting to make sense. I hope this is a decent introduction for you to Flexbox. Understanding how Flexbox works is really about understanding the relationship between the parent Flex container and the child Flex items. We're now ready to start working with Flexbox and learning more about what it can do for us.